Hey everybody, let's talk about using the pen tool in Adobe Photoshop. Usually we talk about using the pen tool in Illustrator, but you can do a lot of great things with the pen tool using Photoshop, and so let's check it out. All right, so what I have here is a template file that's been prepared that has a diagram on it. And what we're going to do is use the pen tool to trace the diagram and talk about the keyboard shortcuts and combinations that are used to make it easier to draw and outline a shape. Now, a number of uses for the pen tool in Illustrator are drawing specific lines so that you can create very specific, precise selections. You can make clipping masks, which would be to knock out a background or take out other elements when you transfer your image file to InDesign or another layout program. Another way to use the pen tool in Photoshop is just to create vector shapes, just like you would in Illustrator. So just to orient yourself, make sure that you've got the path palette open on the side so you can see as you work, it's going to record your path there and save it. Also, you want to look, when you have the pen tool selected, you want to make sure that you're using the correct setting up at the top of the screen. So you can draw either a path or a shape. Essentially, you're going to be drawing a typical shape like you would in Illustrator, where you have an object fill and an object stroke. Or if you're just drawing a path, all you're doing is creating the outline that is invisible and is going to be stuck and saved in your path palette. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this on path because we just want to demonstrate how to trace an object as we go. Let's zoom in a little bit on this. So this diagram basically shows where to start and connecting the dots to go ahead and draw and trace the entire object. So simple thing to do is just start out by making sure that you've got the pen tool selected, and then we're going to position our cursor in the middle of this blue box. That's the letter A, that's our starting point. And just to orient yourself, when you draw with the pen tool, if you click and then click again, you are basically just making a straight line between 2 points. But if you want to create a curve, what you need to do is actually click, hold, and drag so that you can curve the line. So in this case, I'm going to click, not let go, and I'm going to drag toward that little red dot. So I'm going to click once, drag down, and let that handlebar extend until it is overlapping that red dot. Then I'll let go. I'm going to move my cursor to the B position, hover that cursor in the middle of that B box, click, drag toward the red dot. So you can kind of see what it's doing. It's extending that line, and depending on where you orient and tug the anchor point or the handlebar, it's going to extend that curve in the opposite direction. So the goal is to try to get this little outline that's appearing to line up and match the outline of the violin. I'm going to move to position C. Same thing, click and drag upward toward the red dot, and then let go. Now, our first keyboard combination that's going to help us continue is so we can get around this corner. Watch what happens. If I click in the D and drag toward the red dot, you'll see that the previous curve moves back, gives that little serpentine curve toward the point. But look what would happen if I continue to the next position and try to drag toward the red. I get this weird twist in the line. And that's because lines on paths tend to alternate. So when you go from one point to another, it's almost like they reflect. So by default, that curve is going to bounce toward that other line. And that's because it's connected to this handlebar. So what the path tool is going to want you to do is to move this handlebar into the orange position before proceeding to the next step to draw the letter E dot there. So how do we move a handlebar? Well, you move a handlebar by pressing the Option key on your keyboard. When you press Option on the Mac or Alt on the PC, you're going to get a little anchor tool cursor appear when you hover over that handlebar. Notice how it looks like the pen tool, but then when I move it over that dot, That tiny little dot, it turns into the anchor tool. That will allow me to click and drag that handlebar and move it to the orange position. And then I let go of my mouse and I let go of the Alt or the Option key. By moving and turning and bending that handlebar in that opposite direction, it is going to allow the line to curve and bend on the opposite way. I know it's a little weird to kind of figure that out. Why is the line bending the opposite direction of the handlebar? That's just the way these Bezier curves work. Here's another issue. Let's say, for example, that point, I positioned it in the wrong spot. And this is where people get hung up sometimes, is as they're going, they worry about making a mistake and putting a point in the wrong spot. Well, you can move things while you're drawing them by using the direct selection arrow. That is the white arrow. Now, you can certainly go back over here to the toolbar and switch to the selection tool that you need to use. But actually, I don't want to do that. What I really want to do is use the keyboard shortcut. Keyboard shortcut is the command key, or on your PC, it's going to be the control key. If you press that temporarily, your cursor is going to become the direct selection arrow, which will allow you to grab that anchor point and move it into position. And you could go around and select any of your work as you go like that. Now, I've repositioned that, moved it in place, keyboard shortcut Option or Alt, so I can move that handlebar into the new position at orange, let go, move to F. You see I'm continuing around that violin. Option Alt, drag, new position, move to H, keep going. Once you get the hang of it, it goes pretty quickly. What's also cool about vector drawing is nothing is permanent. So you can always go back using one of the arrows, using the anchor tool, using the pen tool, and revise something and fix it. No problem at all. Here we go, almost to the end. Option Alt, drag that down. And now my goal is to just go all the way back to where I started and reconnect with that starting point. And you'll see when I hover the cursor over that endpoint, it gives me a little circle next to the cursor. It's a little hard to see on this display, but I have to click on that starting anchor point, and that's going to connect the line. So now let's take a look at the path palette. That path that I've drawn is now stored there in work path. This is an opportunity for me to save it and hang on to it. So I do want to save it, keep it. Let's say I need to use this again for something. I would save it, call it violin, for example. And now that's going to be stored inside my Photoshop file. Now watch what I can do with that path. As long as I have that path layer selected, I can click the selection, make selection button. And now that path becomes a precise selection following that outline. And what's cool about that is if you need to go back and edit that path, it's always there. You can go back, select it, activate it, use the arrow keys, direct selection, click on it, move an anchor point, readjust it, and you can modify it and perfect it as needed. All right, so that's how to orient yourself a little bit with the path tool in Photoshop. Of course, if you're an Illustrator user, you're very familiar with it, but there are a lot of uses for it in Photoshop, and that's why we have it. All right, so hopefully that gives you some ideas, a little bit of practice, so that you can get more proficient with the pen tool. All right, see you later, guys. See you next time.